President Sullivan, thank you for your time and welcome to the program.
Glad to be here.
Let's start with sports. The University of Virginia Cavaliers had a fantastic postseason in the NCAA tournament. Again, we see in UVA athletics some of the best student athletes in the world. I mean, just amazing talent. The football team has a new coach, so we're excited about that. Give us your perspective from the president's office about athletics at a major public university in the 21st century. It's come under some criticism from some corners lately, and always has back into the 19th century. There's no place at the university for big-time athletics. What's your perspective on that?
Well, I do think that athletics needs to be kept in its place, and that place is those student athletes are students first, and I expect them to go to class, to graduate, take their degrees, and be successful in whatever they want to do, whether that's sports or something else. I think we've got a very good record on that. But having said that, athletic events are a great opportunity for the university. Each one is like a mini reunion. If you had been there in Chicago for the Elite Eight games, we had alumni who came from all over the country to be there. And the same thing is true with all sorts of sporting events. And each team has its own group of active alumni who follow it. The group who go to a wrestling match over in MGM, it's not the same as the group that goes to a swim meet over in the AFC, and it's not the same as the group that comes to watch men or women's tennis. But each sport has its group that's interested, and I think that's terrific. Most of our undergraduate students played a varsity sport in high school. And so athletics was an important part of their life then, and it still is here, because besides the varsity athletics that everybody knows about, we have outstanding club sports and great intramural sports too. So it's something that the students are already interested in. It's part of a full and active life. And when they leave here, we'd like them to be physically active as well as intellectually active.
Yes, spoken like Thomas Jefferson.
Who said something very similar to that. Yes.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm reminded of some of the words of President Alderman, the first president of the university, who spoke in a similar way in the early 20th century about the power, he was talking about football specifically, but about the power of these athletic events to keep alumni connected with the alma mater and keep them plugged in and excited about the school.
Yes.
And you've seen the same thing around the country.
I have, yes. I do think it can also get out of hand, and you have to watch that carefully.
Yeah. What's your reaction to the criticism that some who say that there's so much money now in these big athletics at big universities that it's getting in the way, that the TV contracts and all of this kind of thing?
Well, there's no question there's a lot of money, and that's the reason that we can field 25 sports. I think what's not noted in this criticism is that the money we receive for those TV contracts makes it possible for us to fund first-rate women's teams as well as the men's Olympic teams. We wouldn't be able to do that if we didn't have the money from those contracts.
It wouldn't be happening.
Wouldn't happen, yes. And so to say that, football and basketball bring in too much money, well, football and basketball make it possible for us to have tennis and track and field and swimming and all those other sports.
Yeah. Let me ask you about the strategic plan.
Mm-hmm.
You and your leadership team, in fact, the executive leadership across the university community,
yes,
has, for the last few years, has been laser focused on this strategic plan, this vision for the university in the 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
Shed some light on the work that's gone into that and the results of the work, some of the takeaways of what's going on.
Sure. Well, the Cornerstone Plan was not accidentally named, as we're coming up to the bicentennial of the laying of the cornerstone. And it's really a sort of back to basics plan, thinking about some fundamental issues. What kind of university do we want to be? And one of the answers we heard overwhelmingly was that the residential experience is extremely important. So we focused a lot on improving the residential experience. There's also an important emphasis on faculty resources. A lot of our faculty are nearing retirement age. So we've put a lot of energy and effort into recruiting new faculty who will carry with them the same values and the same scholastic passion and the same heart for the students as the faculty members who are retiring. And there's an important stewardship pillar, because we think it's important that we contain costs in a responsible manner, and that we also acknowledge our donors so that they know that where they are on their pledge payments, they receive thank you messages in a timely fashion, and so on. That's maybe not the glamorous part of the plan, but it's very important. I think we've made progress in every one of those steps, but I think we've still got a ways to go.
Tell me about public education in the 21st century, and specifically the value of a classical liberal arts education in America in the 21st century. Is there still a place for that? Or do you see universities sort of moving more into specialty training for specific careers? Or what is it specifically about that liberal arts education that UVA provides that's not only still valuable, but arguably going to be more valuable in the future?
So let me take your question and put it in two pieces. Let's take the public piece in a minute, but let's take the liberal arts education first. So when you provide a liberal arts education, you're playing the long game. Many people who analyze the American labor force believe that about 50% of the jobs we currently have in the economy will be gone within 35 years. That'll be right in the middle of the work career of today's students. Now, other jobs will take their place, but the jobs haven't been invented. The industries haven't been invented. So how do we best prepare students to look over the horizon for something that's not here yet? Well, I think that the best way we have come up with is to make them flexible, expose them to a variety of subjects and ways of thinking, give them some rigorous methods of thought, give them some enduring values, and then make them as flexible and ready as possible when those new jobs come over the horizon so that they're ready for them. Now, the other thing you can do is you can play the short game. And the short game says, how many people do we need in 4 years to do this or that job in the economy? I think there's room for that as well, and I think there's certain skills and areas that we teach that get students ready for a job immediately. But I would be disappointed if we were not also preparing them for that long game, for those jobs that they take in 4 years that might disappear in 10 years, so that they're ready when that happens and they can go on and do something more. So that's the liberal arts part. And by the way, at most universities, enrollment in the humanities has fallen over the last 10 years. At UVA, it's stayed exactly the same. Our students want to take courses in the humanities even when they're not required. Okay, now the public part. What bothers me about the attitude towards public higher education is the comment I often hear, it's now in 2 Supreme Court decisions, though thankfully it's in dissents, that a public higher education does not have to be excellent, it only has to be adequate. And I do not think the alumni of the University of Virginia will ever stand for saying the University of Virginia is okay being adequate. And I don't think Thomas Jefferson believed that either. So when you say public education, I don't want people to hear in their head merely adequate education. We are public because of our mission and purpose. We are not public because of where the money comes from. Most private universities receive a great deal of public money. Their students get Pell Grants and federally subsidized loans, their faculty get research grants, their donors get tax deductions. There's plenty of public money going into private universities. That's not what makes them private, and where we get private money does not make us any less public. We are public because of our mission, our purpose, and our governance.
What do you think is driving that assault on this traditional vision of the public university, that it doesn't have to be good, it just has to be good enough?
So some of it is just pragmatic politics. Legislatures face many demands, of which the first demand is don't raise taxes. And so with the remaining money, they've got to fund things like prisons, which are typically got a court order that says you've got to provide certain standards for those prisons. They've got things that bring federal matching money, Medicaid, highway construction, and so on. There's K through 12 in every single legislator's district. And now after we get through all those priorities, we get to higher education. So there's a great temptation to say, well, that can be good enough. That doesn't have to be really good. It's not that anybody hates it. Now, there's also a more paranoid theory out there that there is a deliberate effort first to degrade the quality of the public schools, then to degrade the quality of higher education. And maybe there are dark forces out there who've got that in mind, but I'm not making that claim.
Yeah. It's from where you sit and the job that you do, just that part of it, the funding aspect, has to be so incredibly challenging. I mean, every single day, it's a fight to make sure that this university has the resources it needs to do the work that you know this community is capable of doing. Faculty, research, students, so much opportunity, so much talent, so many fantastic minds that are capable of great stuff, but they have to have the resources to do it.
It's a pretty consuming part of my job, and we collect resources from a lot of different places. I talk to a lot of corporate leaders about being our strategic partners, because if they will furnish an undergraduate laboratory for us, I don't have to charge so much tuition for students who use that laboratory. Obviously, I spent a lot of time in Richmond talking with the legislature there. I spent a lot of time in DC because we do get a fair amount of federal funding, and lots of time on the phone and writing and meeting with donors, having events for donors, and that takes up not only my weekdays but a lot of my weekends too.
I would imagine so. And you knew that going in, right, that this was a big part of the job, and in a sense it always has been since President Alderman. One of the criticisms when he was here was, oh, he's not here enough with the students. Well, he's out developing sources to provide the resources.
That's right. Well, it is a problem because there are lots of people who'd like to have you present with them, and if you're not, they criticize you. But on the wall of one of the rooms in Carr's Hill is an original Thomas Jefferson letter written to a friend complaining that the General Assembly doesn't provide enough money for the university. And I think the reason that's hanging there is so every president knows it's not a new problem.
This is just something you deal with.
It's something you do, yeah.
Yeah, and we're thankful that there are people around the world who really get it, and they understand the uniqueness and the specialness of the University of Virginia.
Oh, that's right. UVA was really the first of the public institutions to take private fundraising pretty seriously. And my predecessor, John Castine, deserves a lot of credit for how well he developed that here, long before other public universities had done it. But I think he saw that the funding through the legislature was not ever going to be sufficient to bring the university to what it needed to be.
Let me ask you about the bicentennial. The University of Virginia is getting ready to open the window on a very special period in its history, 200-year anniversary of the founding of the university, the construction, the design, and the opening of classes. All of this is going to take place over the next 10 years. Mm-hmm. It's a real strong decade.
Yes.
What's your thinking now about this bicentennial period that the university is preparing to enter?
Well, I began thinking about it before I came.
Did you really?
I did, yes, because of course I read the history of the university and I realized we had a bicentennial coming forward. So there were some things that I felt we needed to get done before the bicentennial, and renovating the rotunda was a very important one. We've done, I think, a great job. It's going to be magnificent when it's finished.
Yeah.
And it'll be finished well in time for the bicentennial celebrations.
It'll be stunning.
Yes, that's right. The second thing was I really felt the university needed to deal forthrightly with the uncomfortable past that we have with slavery. And so the President's Commission on Slavery in the University was named. They've done a lot of very good work discovering things we actually didn't know about ourselves, but also appropriately commemorating it. So we've discovered a cemetery site for enslaved people that we didn't know existed on grounds. We have renovated it, we've restored it, we've dedicated it. Our new residence hall is named for an enslaved couple who worked for the university, and then in emancipation were leaders in the African American community. So I thought all of those were important things to do before we began celebrating the bicentennial itself. So the first event in the bicentennial will be October 6th of 2017. That's the bicentennial of when President Monroe, James Madison, and of course Thomas Jefferson laid the cornerstone for the Colonnade Club, which is Pavilion 7. And we will have a great ceremony to celebrate that. 1819 is the date that we received the charter from the General Assembly. That's another important bicentennial date. 2025 marks the anniversary of the first students attending. And then 2026 marks the anniversary of Mr. Jefferson's last visit to the university, his death, and also it's the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So 2026 will be a very big year indeed. So our bicentennial classes will be aware of this. They'll have some special insignia they receive at graduation. We want to have an opportunity to celebrate with UVA alumni all over the world, not just here in Charlottesville. And more than a celebration, we want it to be a time to reflect on what kind of university we want this to be in its third century. The Cornerstone Plan was designed to bring us up to this period and to reinvigorate our infrastructure, bring us to the point where we had the new faculty who could do the things we need to do in our third century. But there is a lot of thought and wisdom in the people associated with the university that I want to tap as we think about who we're going to be in our third century.
Connect some dots for us, if you can. The idea of a classical liberal arts education, funding challenges, and this bicentennial, this vision that Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, who was as involved in many ways as Jefferson was, totally focused on creating this, what was at the time a very unique place in America. And here we are almost 200 years later, still at work, and that vision and what was originally a very, very small school has since become the preeminent public university on the planet. It's staggering to think about.
Not merely adequate, yes. No, I think that it's a wonderful story, and an integral part of it was Jefferson's vision that the university would produce citizen leaders for a democracy. Well, we take that very seriously. Self-governance probably goes further at the University of Virginia than any other school of which I'm aware, because we want these young people to come in here and be aware of their responsibilities as citizens. Voting, of course, but far beyond voting. And we need them. We need that leadership because we're not totally certain where democracy is going in the world today. It's also not just for citizen leaders of the United States. We have students from 130 countries here at the University of Virginia. And I think one of the great things about that is our American students have the opportunity to encounter them and get perspectives on their country. But they also can go home with this tradition of self-governance that we have here among our students and take it with them wherever they go. I think that is really as true to Jefferson's vision as we could be. But that doesn't make it easy. You know, he found democracy pretty tough going in his election, and I think that he would resonate with some of what's going on in the elections today. We have to make our students resilient and insightful about politics so that they can be leaders.
Right, and truly appreciate what he wrote of so often, that it's a constant struggle to maintain democracy, to create this engine, as he would call it. He called it the engine of responsibility that could preserve and protect human and civil rights in the future.
If you take it for granted, you won't have it. And that's an important message we hope our students leave here with. But also with the tools to help keep democracy going and with the wisdom to have a vision for where it should go.
Which sets up perfectly my next question, which is about leadership. It wasn't long after you got into your office here at the university that you faced some significant challenges regarding some tragedies. VQR, Hannah Graham, Martise Johnson, Rolling Stone, your own episode with the board a few years ago. If anybody could write a book about leadership in crisis, it is you. And I'm sure you have had ample time to reflect on this. What have you learned the hard way about leadership in crisis and crisis management? Everything has been thrown at you over the last few years and at the university.
Yes, that's right. Well, you know, I think one of the things I've learned is that your own values make a big difference. And you need to go back to your own values as safe refuge. One of the things I value, obviously, is student safety. And so in some of these crises, we had to think first about what can we do that will keep as many of our students as safe as possible for the longest period of time. And that was relatively easy. But the second issue is, what is the best thing for the university? That's not always as easy to figure out. And it's not necessarily the most important thing. The safety of the students I would always put before that. I guess the other thing that I would say about it is, we learned from all of these how important the University of Virginia is. I'd be rated a Washington Times reporter because at the same time Hannah Graham was tragically abducted and murdered, there was also a student from Longwood, and the same thing happened. And her parents were just as heartbroken as the Grahams. And we grieve for that too, but they didn't cover that story. And in fact, the reporter told me he didn't know about it. Well, it was his job to know about that. But because it happened at the University of Virginia, it was a big deal. And so when our students say, why are they always picking on us? Part of the answer is, well, because it is the University of Virginia. It does matter. And in a peculiar way, that's reinforcing, I suppose. I also have to say that if one of our objectives is developing leadership in our students, we saw our students rise to the occasion. Yeah. They all did a magnificent job in trying circumstances. They were resources for each other. They were resilient when they had a camera poked in their face. They did a good job of representing the university and themselves. I was proud of them and how they reacted.
Take a moment and speak as candidly as you can. What's the best part of your work in being president of the University of Virginia? What's the part you look forward to the most? And on the flip side, I won't say the worst part, but what's the least best part that you may not look forward to so much?
Oh, the best part for me is interacting with students, which I do in a lot of ways. I'm having 30 students to my house for dinner tonight, for example. That's something I really look forward to, and I enjoy watching them develop and learn from the time they're first years until the time they take their degree. So that's been, I think, really something I've really enjoyed. I think the worst part has been trying to keep the university a step ahead of the increasing levels of regulation we experience. And it's really far beyond, I think, anything you could imagine if you weren't in my seat. 14 federal agencies regulate the use of animals in laboratory experiments, for example. You might think you could have one form you would send to 14 agencies, but no, it doesn't work that way. And so I spent an awful lot of time just dealing with regulation. And while I understand the purposes of the regulation, and obviously I don't want to see animals abused or, any of these other bad things happen, still I find that the amount of time and personnel we have to spend on this, rather than spending educating our students, is a real loss, I think, for us.
And that might go towards explaining the increase in the number of administrative positions we've
Yes.
seen at public universities in America. Is just, you need people to deal with the paperwork.
That's right. That's right.
The
And
flood of paperwork.
Well, in some cases, the regulations require that there will be an official with the title of XYZ, and so you're more or less forced to get another person so that you can be in compliance. Yeah. And so I think for all large universities, especially those with medical schools, this has become a big issue. But even for small universities, it's an issue, and they have even fewer resources to deal with it.
Just to wrap up here, how do you think you'll remember these years as president of the university? And looking back, what's the one or two key things you think you'll take with you from the experience, from the work?
I think the best years of my life will probably be part of that recollection. But also just a collage of the great team I've had to work with. They've been magnificent. Nobody does this kind of job alone. And there are just terrific leaders here. The wonderful new people we've been able to bring into leadership positions at the university. That's been really a great pleasure to me. And these people have wonderful ideas. They're going to be great for the university for years to come. And also I thank the many alumni and members of the board and others who have been forward thinking in not wanting to play the short game, being willing to play the long game and think about the long run welfare of the university.
President Sullivan, thank you so much for your leadership, the work you do, and for your time as well. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, Coy. Thank you.